Have a warm welcome to the Brown Marmorated Stink Bug annual update, and would like to welcome our visitors from Australia and from Europe and also from New Zealand. To the next slide, please, Francesco. Here's the agenda for today. We'd just like to give you a little bit of housekeeping up front. We'll do an introduction to our guest speakers. Dialing in from Italy, it's Julia, and we've got the New Zealand team. The idea is just to introduce you to our speakers, to then walk you through an insight to the BMSB season, talk to you about the affected countries. We thought it would be a good idea to give you an insight from both the origin, that's why Julia's joined us, and also from New Zealand, so that you can see the challenges from both ends of the supply chain. Just to the housekeeping, if you will, what we've noticed, or what we've heard from you in terms of setting up the session, is that it's really important for us to provide you with practical tips on this topic. Lots of questions around specifically to the fumigation requirements, and also for us to share with you what are the potential freight delays and the impacts of this process. So we intend to cover that today, but before we do that, we just want to ensure that as far as housekeeping is concerned, we'll take all of your questions on the chat box. At the end, we'd love for you to provide feedback at the end of this webinar. We will take a live recording so that we can distribute that straight after this session. And please don't, after this session, hesitate to get in touch with us, because that's why we're here to help. The next slide, thanks, Francesco. And here we go. I'm Eric Pilling. It's my pleasure to host today. Francesco is based in New Zealand. He's also from Italy, but he's been in New Zealand for some time. He's got extensive experience from both Europe and also our last few years on the ground in New Zealand. Julia joins us from Italy. Welcome, Julia. She's very experienced at Origin. She knows this sector extremely well. She's on the ground every day, so she can share with us not just what you read in a book or the theory, but she can talk to us about what actually happens on a daily basis, and she will share with us her insights. And Tim, he's been a customs broker. He's actively involved in our integrated supply chain solution here in New Zealand. And again, he's on the ground dealing with questions and problems that need to be solved every day. So Tim's also joining us today. So I think without any further ado, we'd like to again thank you for joining us. At the end, the idea is we're going to give you the information. At the end, take questions. It's over to you, Francesco.
So welcome to all. Thank you for attending the meeting. I want to just give you a quick introduction to the new season of Brown Marmorated Stink Bug. So the measure will apply to all the risk goods manufactured in and or exported from the 37 countries, which I will explain later. For the sea cargo, leaving the affected countries on or after the 1st of September and arriving into New Zealand on or before the 30th of April 2021 inclusive. So we are having this year we are having 37 countries involved. They mainly are from European countries. MPI allows us to use 3 different types of treatment. So the heat treatment means that we have to increase the temperature to 56 Celsius degrees for at least 30 minutes. This is the most effective, cheapest, and quickest treatment, but unfortunately is not suitable for all the type of cargo, because some type of cargo can be damaged to the high temperatures. A solution is to use the sulfuryl fluoride, but unfortunately is a little bit more expensive and is not available from all the port of loading. The last one, treatment that MPI allow us to use, is the methyl bromide, but unfortunately in New Zealand is legal, but in the European Union and in the United States of America is illegal since the 80s. Last point that I want to bring is that air freight cargo does not require the compulsory fumigation. So if you ship via air freight, we can avoid the fumigation. regarding the 37 countries in...
Can I just go back a slide? Just a question on that 1st of September. Just can you be clear about that?
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, just to clarify, the ATD is the day of fumigation. So, which means that all the cargo which will leave with ATD, the affected countries from the 1st of September might require a fumigation, a compulsory fumigation.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So, as you can see from the tab and the map, we have 37 countries involved. The mainly of them are European Union countries. Our two largest trading partners are, as you may know, are China and Australia, and these are not affected to this regulation. And as you can see from the map, the only Asian country involved is Japan. As you can see from the slide, yeah, the exports are European. So now it's a pleasure to me to pass the speech to Giulia. So Giulia, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Francesco. Good evening, everyone. I will give you some brief suggestions because, as said by Eric, we deal with fumigation on daily basis. So we know which are the main issues that that can be met by a supplier and the provider. So generally speaking, I would recommend to book your new containers out of Europe with an extra week notice. So if you can, together with your suppliers, inform us with some extra notice of a new order coming ready, that would be really helpful for us to arrange the treatment in due time for you to catch the intended vessel and make sure the treatment is arranged in the best way possible. Fortunately, it doesn't take so much time to arrange fumigation. Let's say it takes between 24 and 48 hours. So it's still a reasonable time frame, but the earlier, the best. So every time we are in touch with the supplier, we ask them to confirm if and which kind of fumigation they wish to proceed with, and based on this, we give you the intended vessel and tell you when the fumigation can be arranged. So this is just a simple suggestion. As soon as you place an order, you can tell us and we will be in touch with your supplier to help him with all the fumigation steps. Second suggestion and second information. So fortunately, loading rules didn't change since last season. Which is good because now all suppliers and manufacturers in Europe already know how to load a container and already know which is the vacant space to leave in order to allow the fumigant to circulate into the container. So they are really good in doing that. They always have our assistance when they have doubts or specific questions, because cargo and type of cargo can vary a lot based on what they produce. However, loading rules are unchanged, so as long as cargo is loaded onto a pallet and there is some vacant space from the top of the cargo and the ceiling of the container, we are able to fumigate. Another important rule is to slash plastic wrapping. So if a manufacturer tells you that we require big slashes on the plastic they put on your cargo, this is true and this is a mandatory request. from the providers, and it's a rule for fumigation. Third point, what about heat treatment? So, as said, this is the preferred fumigation solution simply because it's the most available. It's available at all European ports, especially in Italy. It is always available, and on top of that, it is the fastest one. So let's say that even if you can't give us a big notice from the ready date of the order to the intended vessel, with a heat treatment solution, we are still able to meet the intended departure because it's the fastest one. And last point I was willing to touch refers to LCL shipments. Again, we can treat LCL cargo with both methods. So we can use heat treatment or sulfuryl fluoride, okay? We can do that at our warehouse. So when it comes to LCL shipments, we simply pick up your cargo, we bring it at our depot, we fumigate before departure, and you won't have any issue at destination. So we managed to arrange a solution and a procedure which allows also to have all LCL shipments treated. So these are my piece of suggestions for this season.
Brilliant, thank you very much. We'll come back to some questions later, Julia. That's very insightful. Yeah. Thank you very much. Timothy, would like to flick over to you from the New Zealand and the destinations perspective.
So I'd just like to briefly just give you guys an introduction of why MPI are so stringent on their requirements for BMSB into New Zealand. And it's because this pest is not only quite a nuisance in domestic households, but they are quite invasive as well. They do like grapes and kiwi fruit and quite a few other different fruits and vegetables that would seriously affect our economy if it was to establish roots here in New Zealand. How MPI actually manage it is over 2 different health standards, and those health standards are particularly the imported sea container standard, but also the vehicles, machinery, and parts standard. The vehicles, machinery, and parts standard usually will cover everything in it from Italy, but also the 37 BMSB risk countries, which we do have a hyperlink on the presentation to give you a list of those countries. The SECO containers import health standard, that is more specific to Italy. That standard is purely for Italy and only affects Italy. Now, the difference between the requirements from last year compared to this season, this year, is simply that the SECO standard has changed, so that the vehicle machinery and parts, new vehicle machinery and parts that undergo an MPI approved system to manage BMSB, the change is that a manufacturer's declaration, a signed manufacturer's declaration, would be required to provide evidence that it has undergone that approved treatment criteria. 4 countries have newly been added into the list, and that is Kazakhstan, Moldova, Portugal, and the Ukraine. The other change is the 21-day rule between treatment and exportation. That's now been removed for fully sealed containers only. Okay. The other change, which is quite good news is that if we are able to provide evidence that the container, a fully sealed FCL container, has been sealed before the 1st of September, it's excluded from BMSB requirements. And how we would provide evidence of that is the departure date printed on the bill of lading. And that's how MPI would generally accept that as evidence. The specific difference between Italy and other BMSB Schedule 3 countries is that Schedule 3 countries, excluding Italy, the only products that are affected are the vehicles, machinery, and parts, nothing else. However, from Italy, everything excluding sensitive cargo, and there is a sensitive cargo list which generally includes foodstuffs, packaging for foodstuffs, textile materials that include apparel or furniture, for example. Those are excluded, but we would, it's up to us as the broker to provide that information to MPI. So nothing from Italy or the supplier is really needed. We just need to know that it's textile material, for example, and it's excluded as a sensitive cargo, and it's excluded. Now, the exclusions of the vehicles, machinery, and parts standard, they have added new low-risk vehicles into there, and bicycles, tricycles, et cetera, they do not apply to Italy. They apply to every other Schedule 3 country, but they will still be subject to BMSB requirements if they're shipped from Italy. Okay. Third one is treatment and specific rates. So I'd just like to cover this, the specific treatment rates for BMSB. The first one is heat treatment, and it is at 56 degrees Celsius for at least 30 minutes. That's the heat treatment requirement. The sulfuryl fluoride requirement is a dose of 24 grams cubic or above at a temperature of 10 degrees Celsius for 12 hours, but no more than 24 hours. Okay. How MPI would need that as evidence of that treatment is just through a treatment certificate. Now, original treatment certificates previously were required last season, halfway through. Now that has changed. Good news, very good news. So an electronic copy of the fumigation certificate will be accepted. Originals are no longer required. Okay. When goods require treatment, regardless of the BMSB requirements, we're talking about products that in their own right require treatment. The simple standpoint from MPI is that if the treatment standard for that product is the same or more than the BMSB rates, then it's fine. However, if it is less, then it is not. It will need to be treated at the minimum BMSB rate. Okay. And I think that concludes my portion.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tim. So we will head into questions from the audience, but before we head in there, just a little couple of observations from my end. The Brown Marmorated Stink Bug, it is described as a very sneaky pest, and it's already in the States, it's already in Europe. And as Tim explained, the reason that MPI is so harsh on this particular bug is linked exactly as you've highlighted, Tim, to the economy of New Zealand, and that's why these extreme measures are in place. But the team have asked and maybe I'll ask each one of our panelists, they've said, can you give us sort of one practical tip that you would, as an importer to New Zealand, give us from your experience? So that one practical tip that you would say from your experience that you would give to the people listening today. So Tim, if there was one tip that you could give, one practical example or one practical idea that you could share with the team, what would that be?
If it is a BMSB product, if it is shipping from a BMSB country, my tip would be to absolutely reach out to your suppliers, to reach out to our counterpart in Italy, Julia, and Julia should be able to guide the supplier or the shipper as to exactly what the requirements are and the process in Italy. She's done it for a number of years and she's quite good at it, so I trust that.
That's a good tip.
Good.
That's a tip. All right. What's your practical tip, Julia? The one practical tip to the team listening today.
Yeah. A practical tip for subjecting cargo is to store the cargo as much as you can inside a place. So it is pretty common because, you know, there's a general lack of space in warehouses to produce cargo and sometimes to leave cargo outside, okay? That's the biggest mistake because these bugs can find their preferred spot inside pellets or between plastic wrapping. That's why we must slash it, because that is the spot where they like to go, because they can feel the heat of the plastic. So the most the manufacturer can store cargo inside a warehouse or wherever in their plant, they lower the risk to find bugs onto the cargo itself.
That's very practical. That's a big tip. Francesca, have you got a practical tip that you would like to share with the team from your experience?
Maybe give clear instruction to your suppliers overseas, and if you are unsure that your cargo has to be treated, my strong suggestion is to double check with us, and we can instruct you accordingly if the cargo has to be treated or not.
That's a good. Also perfect. So I think big questions from the team up front before, give us something practical. So I think what Julia's saying is that these bugs are, if stuff's left outside, big risk, keep them inside and get connected with the supplier just to make sure that both ends are clear on whether your product needs to be addressed or it's not addressed. One of the other big questions from the team before we started was what potential delays can happen if we're not compliant. So if you end up with a problem, can you give examples, maybe Julia, from your experience from the origin, what the potential impact can be in terms of the freight delays? And then maybe Tim can talk about from a New Zealand perspective. But if there's a problem, what can I expect, with potential delays?
Okay, so worst case scenario. If a container arrives at the fumigation depot and doors are open and cargo, for example, is not loaded correctly as required by the regulation, unfortunately, a fumigator can reject the container. So they can ask us to bring the container back to the supplier, have it packed and loaded as per the written book, and send it back to the fumigator, which usually takes a few days up to a week, especially during peak season. So unfortunately, the freight can be delayed also of a week time or even 10 days, which is really unpleasant. But unfortunately, providers are extremely strict and rules are really stringent. So we really must try to apply to them as much as possible. And this is the reason why every time we contact a manufacturer, a supplier, we always revise together all the steps and the rules to follow. And another important point I would like to tell you is that in case of assistance, we can go directly to your supplier personally, together with the fumigator or one of his assistants, explaining the supplier how to prepare cargo, how to load it into the container, so that you won't have any issues once the freight is loaded and is arriving at the fumigation point. Perfect.
Hey, Julia. So that's quite motivating. 1 week to 10 days to avoid that delay. So that's a good flag. And from a New Zealand perspective, Tim, what have you seen when the worst case scenario hits and the impact and the delay to freight?
We don't usually like to talk about worst case scenario, but worst case scenario for New Zealand is the shipment being fully rejected from the border. And what I mean by that is MPI won't let the container off the vessel. They'll leave the container on the vessel and say it's not entering New Zealand at all. That is worst case scenario. But provided that the containers are all treated, packed correctly, and before arrival into New Zealand, that shouldn't happen. However, the resources that are required that MPI put into managing BMSB are quite substantial. Our general processing times for MPI applications, or BACCs, is right now about 3 days, and we don't expect that to change too much. And we expect that to maybe increase to 4 to 5 days during peak BMSB. To put that in perspective, 2 seasons ago or 2 years ago, MPI were quite under-resourced and understaffed. That translated to MPI applications and BACCs being returned about 14 days after the application. That would generally mean 14 days that container is sitting on the wharf and not able to move. So it is, they have put a lot more resource into it to stop those kind of delays. But the real delay that a general importer would experience, especially if they have biosecurity required products, is just that the processing times for the application will be slightly longer.
Okay, so we've just heard from both Julia and Tim. So worst case scenario at origin is it gets pushed back to the supplier. There's 10 days at origin. As Tim said, we don't want to talk about worst case in New Zealand because that could be completely rejected. But historically, it's been up to 14 days. Most recently, a few days, up to 3 days after additional resources have been put in place. So quite clearly being compliant means you eliminate the delays, but that was again a key question from the audience, and that was, what are the potential delays that I need to be aware of to manage? So at this point, we're just before the half hour where our panelists were giving open feedback. We're open to questions if you'd like to log them, and we'll take them as they come through. As they start to come through, and if we do get any, because I think the panelists have answered a lot of the questions up front, I'm really interested, Julia, from a cost perspective, just to give the people on the ground in New Zealand some idea of where they would go to, if this is new for them and they have to go and work through a process of having fumigation. We can provide them with information on costs, a ballpark figure on what the fumigation costs are.
Yeah, sure. Usually I provide all our clients a flat figure, which includes already the fumigation costs and the loading costs, the movements that we need to consider once a container arrives at the fumigation point, because as you can imagine, a container needs to be picked up, put on the ground, open doors, arranging the treatment, and then reclosed and shipped back to the port. So you will see a unique figure which varies based on the container type, in case of a standard box or open top or flat rack container. Eric, if you like, I can provide you the chart with all standard charges. However, just to give you roughly an idea, the final cost for a 20-box container is €500 from Italy, which includes everything.
That's great, thanks, Julia. And I think Francesco can provide a detailed sheet which you've provided with us. So I think that the point there is, yes, that there is a real cost that's associated, and Francesco can provide you with the sheet given us, Julia, which gives, as you say, depending on the size of the container, a fully loaded overview of what that costing looks like. And from New Zealand's perspective, Tim, you've got, if for instance there needs to be inspections and the MPI guys need to come out, there is a cost for that too, isn't there?
Yes, there is. So MPI generally charge about $25.57 per 15 minutes, plus a zoning fee.
Right.
Generally, from experience, the cost for inspection ranges between $100 to $250.
Right. Very good. Francesco, any other point? Have you, when you're talking to clients in New Zealand, do you have many questions related to the costs, or any questions on the pricing?
Usually the clients, are asking me questions regarding the pricing, if they are confirmed like last year or they have changed. So I'm always happy to give the last updated rate to the clients when they require it.
Perfect. Okay, so I think as far as the open questions from the audience are concerned, we'll give it a couple of minutes. If not, then we can wrap up. But maybe I can just sort of give some of the key themes that I think we've taken away from the session today. I think first of all, we understand that this is a very sneaky pest, and the reason that the New Zealand government is pushing so hard to ensure this doesn't come to New Zealand is because of the economic impact. I think Julia talked to us about ensuring that through the season, advance notice and advanced information through to the supplier is really important. She's suggesting an extra week's notice would be extremely well received. That the good news is that last year the loading rules didn't change. So from a European perspective, everyone's updated and is familiar with how to load in the past. Slashing plastic wrapping, if that's a request, that is a real requirement that allows the fumigation to be effective. Making sure there's space on top of the pallets is important, and that LCL shipments is also applicable. Practical tip also from Julia was instruct your supplier to leave your product inside, not outside where there's an increased risk. Connecting with the suppliers was also a theme from both Tim and Francesco. Making sure that the suppliers are well connected to those specific requirements. Sandy's just dropped us a note, and her question is, what would cause MPI to need to inspect a container in New Zealand? I think that's one for you, Tim. So that's a good question. Why would MPI all of a sudden flag that they'd like to have a look at one of the containers?
If it's shipped directly from Italy and it is a sensitive cargo, and it is sensitive cargo not subject to BMSB treatment, then it would be subject to an increased inspection rate. You won't have an 100% inspection rate. However, just to verify that there aren't any creepy crawlies inside that container, just to an increased inspection rate would be in place. And that's for all Italian containers.
Can you give an example of that, Tim?
For example, furniture from Italy, quite a big one for us. If they are of leather or of textile material and are on the sensitive cargo list, then obviously it won't be treated. It'll just be imported into New Zealand without BMSB requirements. We'll send through an MPI application because of the type of product, and it may come back with an inspection request or a straight clearance.
Perfect. I hope that answered your question, Sandy. If not, you can type away again, and then Tim can have another go. We've also had another question. It was mentioned that a fumigator could connect with the supplier and to advise regarding content and packaging. Would there be costs involved with this, Julia, if we asked one of our team to go out and consult with the supplier?
Well, it really depends where the supplier is based. Let's say that if we are talking about supplier based in north of Italy, usually we can grant this service for free. Instead, for example, if a supplier is based in Sicily, which is one of the best regions in Italy, but you really need to take a flight to go there, then some costs may rise. But we always try, as we really do, with the goodwill to educate suppliers to load at their best. We try to keep the cost to zero. Unless, as said, we really need to move hundreds of kilometers.
Perfect. Hopefully that answered that question. Maybe if needed too, there could be the potential to do something virtually, but I understand what you're saying. That's good, Julia. Hopefully that answered that question. So as far as the other feedback that we had on the call today, Francesco, you talked about your local experience, connecting with people on the ground here, and I think that for the team in New Zealand, or for the team that have got requirements to connect to importers, then Francesco does have that European and Italian experience. He's based on the ground and can connect locally, as is Tim with his experience. And I think what's been demonstrated today is that with Julia's vast knowledge, if we have future questions, we can tap into her, and we can have an answer to you the following morning if there's additional points that need to be clarified. So I think that's all the questions we've had. The feedback we've been given up front was, please provide us with practical tips. Please provide us with a clear instruction on what fumigation requirements are, potential delays that this particular season could cause us. I think those points have been covered well. Francesco will be sending you a summary of the discussion that we've had today, and there'll also be a request for feedback form, request at the end of the session, so that you can maybe give us some guidance on what we could do better next time. And if there's no further questions, and we'll give you 30 seconds to pop any last questions in. Otherwise, I'd just like to, if I could go back to the panel and just say if there's any last closing comments that you'd like to make before we wrap up, then we're all clear to wrap up, just 5 minutes ahead of time. So Francesco, anything else that you'd like to say just before we wrap up?
No, all good, all good.
You're in. Good stuff. Timothy, anything you're in before we wrap up?
If there are any other queries after the seminar, just please feel free to reach out. We're here to help.
Perfect. And Julia, anything else before we wrap up?
We are here to help, so any questions, myself and all the Italian team is at your disposal.
Fantastic. Well, we'd like to wish you a great evening, a great early evening in Australia, a great morning in Europe. Enjoy that morning espresso, Julia, and we're off to something colder than a morning coffee. So have a lovely evening. Have a lovely morning. See you, everyone.